broadcasting live out of a basement in Appleton, Wisconsin. You're tuned into Fox Cities Core on WCZR Code Zero Radio. We're the show that gives you an opportunity to call in and be a part of the show. Our call-in line is 920-358-0795. Core. My next guest, he's in a high-energy rock and roll band that was formed in 2009 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They've appeared at Summerfest, Day Trotter, and clubs throughout the Midwest. They've been featured in Paste Magazine. I'd like to welcome Adam from the Appalachians to Fox Cities Core. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, and we've got a lot of ground to cover today.
We got an hour. Just me, man.
It should be a fun show, so we'll get it out of the way right away, but it's the future of the band is looking kind of in limbo right now.
Dude, I am here to basically put the final nail in the coffin.
That's a very...
Everybody else is dead.
It's a very depressing kind of way to lead in, but it is, I guess, as they say, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's essentially kind of what's happening right now, but it's all in all things love type of deal where, you know, it's just honestly people are at a crossroads with their life, and changes have to happen, and you have to follow what it is you want to do. I mean, we got people that are leaving the state, so I mean, kind of hard.
It's kind of hard to keep it together when people are that far away. Especially
in a very regional area, you know, it's not like, oh, I'll fly in next weekend for our show. Like, it's just not that level, you know.
You do hear once in a while nowadays, like bands that'll, you know, they live in different states and they trade stems back and forth on the internet, and then they, you know, get together and play a show a year. Is that something that the Appalachians would ever consider?
I mean, we kind of did when we had a little bit of our hiatus. We had been through this before, kind of like guys getting married, having kids and stuff like that, and just taking some time off, and which ended up being a good solid 5 years between 2015 and 2020. And we would play down in Milwaukee. They do these live riverboat showcases. We call them booze cruises, because that's basically all you did. You play on a boat, and you know, it's a good. We would find little places like that could be just like a big house, something fun that's not just like focused on like the pressure of a release or, you know, an album, or without having something to promote. You know, that's always the trickiest part of doing kind of one-offs, is like what's special about what the show you're doing, you know.
So that would probably not happen.
It would probably not happen.
Well, let's talk about like when you got interested in music, and then we'll talk about the forming of the Appalachians.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I come from a very musical household. My oldest sister was always into like Broadway and stuff, and 4 older sisters in the 90s. So, I mean, I got a taste of everything from Backstreet Boys to Garbage to, you know, so and my parents were mega Beatles fans. I feel like every kid either grew up either a Stones or a Beatles fan. We were Beatles fans, and grew tons of 90s inspirations throughout all my life, because that was just kind of like my starting point, and I just never really got away from it. So I've always, and that 90s sound of, you know, raw authenticity, you know, kind of bleeding through, and not so much compression, and it's just that whole raw style of production was always just my favorite.
When you were growing up, was MTV still playing music, or were they onto the reality?
Oh yeah. But when I was in MTV, it was kind of the weird period of like, they started doing the reality shows, and like obviously, Jackass was huge, and that had its own music scene too, with kind of like the stoner rock, and but a lot of MTV when I was kind of like in high school was kind of focused on more of like what I call the Chad rock bands, you know,
Chad rock,
Alter Bridge, let's see, like Nickelback or Chevelle, which I mean, nothing wrong if that's what you're into, but it really stemmed away from anything that I was particularly interested at the time. So
you were into Nirvana, the Beatles, just a lot
huge Nirvana fan. I think that was probably my biggest game changer. Is the first time I ever heard Nevermind.
Did that make you pick up a guitar, or you already had one?
I didn't already have one, and I never really considered the idea until like music really resonated with me on a personal level. Like I always thought it just kind of looked cool, but when I was actually like really consuming music and it kind of meant something to me is kind of when I sat down. And then you learn and you play all the classics, that like the easy riffs. You play Metallica songs, you play Nirvana songs, but Nirvana was a huge inspiration for me. Just the simplicity, and growing up a Beatles fan, like I said, it's like to me they almost sounded like the same band from like a different like a 30-year difference almost. Like Kurt's ability for quick to the point incredible melodies was like blew my mind that you could do that with such a small sample of sound. 3 people, that blew that really resonated with me. Like you can do a lot with so little.
When you were listening to that in the 90s, did you make the connections yet that Nirvana had been at Smart Studios in Madison?
No, didn't. I mean, that was all after the fact for me. Actually, right around when that documentary came out with Smart Studios, or just before that, they did like this sale at the studio, just selling like whatever leftover junk before like they totally cleared that building. I ended up grabbing like a microphone from there, and somebody's like, "Yeah, it's from like the 90s or something."
That's cool.
So it's like, dude, you don't know who played into this. Like I just had to have it. Like I got no history on it or anything, but it's just like an old 57 mic. And I was just like, dude, this has got to have his. It's in this building, so I'm coming home with it. It's like taking a brick off of like a demolished building you used to work in or something, or like when they took down County Stadium or the old Lambeau, people got like the bricks. Like that was something that I didn't learn about the history of Smart until 2009-ish, which is that around when that documentary probably came out?
It was quite a bit after that, but I mean, that's when Smart was closing. I think that was around that time.
Yeah, because I was enrolled over at Madison Media Institute studying audio engineering. So like that's really when it came full circle to me. Like, oh my God, like Madison has a huge history behind it, built with a couple people, like simple minds like you and I.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to have a place like that in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin, and like just driving the freeway to get there, it's just like cornfields and then boom, little city, and all that noise coming from that little place. That was what was beautiful about the 90s. Same thing with Seattle. Like all these bands from like these logging towns, that didn't fit in or didn't really have like the means to be like one of those hot LA bands at the time or whatever. It was just authenticity all the time, and people were drawn to it.
Do you remember the first time you picked up a guitar then?
Yeah, it would have been like 7th grade summer. My mom had her old one that she had just pulled out of the basement, and my dad went and got it strung for whatever reason, because I think my sister's friend was coming in from out of town, and he was a touring artist, and he was staying the weekend at our place, so he was basically going to do this whole weekend bonfire session for us. And I just kind of watched him, and after he would be done, he would kind of sit down and just be like, hold it here. I'm like, oh, I can do that. And then it just felt intriguing, like, wow, I'm making that noise. And ever since I started reading tabs and all of that, and just boo 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 doo 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 doo. That's where it started for me.
And then at what point did you decide, I think I'm going to start writing my own songs? Was it just, I mean, were you ever in a cover band, first of all?
No, just like weird high school bands where we'd just like drink in the basement and after school and hang out and get into whatever kind of trouble. And like somebody would be like, hey, the Chancery restaurant says we could maybe play. And it's like kind of like this steakhouse ordeal, like that doesn't know that we're a high school band that's all jacked up on Mountain Dew. And
then so eventually you started, was the Appalachians your first band?
It was my first band.
Wow.
It's like the only thing I've ever done musically. I mean, I've released a couple songs outside of it on my own, but never like really put anything behind it. But for the most part, this has been my primary musical focus throughout. I mean, I started writing songs for this band when towards the end of high school. So like 2006, 2007 timeframe when I was playing with high school band stuff. Like I was writing stuff that I was like, let me feel what this sounds like with other people. And, the idea is more people, it started as a project, like just bringing people in and just, if they have a good approach to take with a certain song, like we would lay it down and then that would be it. And we had a cast of characters just kind of coming in and laying down parts, and it came down to 4 of us that were like, we're in this regular rotation of doing this anyways, like let's just make it a band. At first it was more something of like just way to showcase, network. Like, I mean, it's hard to just go out and find people to play with. They got to be, you want them to be compatible with you and, not come with a baggage of issues. And, somebody first and foremost, that's cool that like you can spend all this time with just shooting whatever, So it was always hard to find people like that. And we kind of came from all over the state. Our guitar player at the time was from Twin Lakes, and our drummer Ryan was from Fond du Lac. And when he first joined the band, something had happened with his car. So I was driving up from Milwaukee to Fond du Lac to go get him, bring him down for band practice, back up to Fond du Lac, back down to Milwaukee. So it's a lot of work to get something off the ground. This is the point that I'm trying to make is you gotta be kind of serious and wanting it to happen. You gotta make real solid efforts to it.
So like how fast did the songwriting start once you had the core group of 4 together? Were any of the songs that ended up on your first release written when you still had the rotation, the rotating group of people kind of shuffling in and out?
Yeah, so the first EP that we did was Long Wait, Slow Lines. We did that. We started it in like 2009 and just really took our time with it. Friend of mine who has a studio in like this lake house out in Waukesha County. Great guy, Aaron Fontaine, works as a in-house engineer, really worked with us in like developing songs and like studio sounds. It was a totally new experience for all of us versus just a little 2-track mic recorder. Like this was very much like this happening down here, and it was overwhelming, but he really coached us kind of through it and like, this is how you play. I mean, he's like, I know you guys are used to like playing loud, and like, this is how it translates into a studio. So he really helped us with that. And I would come in with song ideas and just partially written out, and then everybody else would just come in and just react naturally to whatever I had written. And we would build it up through the studio. It wasn't like we were working on it in a basement. It was all built through like a studio setup, everything that we had written. And it came together cool that way, and I don't think we would have learned as much about the recording process had we not done it that way. But we had released that EP, and one of the songs, the last song on that is called Notice. I had written that like as a junior in high school, and every time we were doing open mics downtown Milwaukee, specifically at the Up and Under pub on Brady Street is kind of where we birthed out of, and you get time for like 3 or 4 songs, and that was always the one in a rotation. That's the one like people actually would stop what they're doing and kind of look up to the stage. And after we closed with that song, people were like, you got an album, or you got somewhere I can listen to this on the way home? And we didn't have anything at the time. That was the moment. It was like, we should probably jot some of these ideas down at this point. What do you think? And everybody was down and made a good run from it.
So that debut album or EP, whatever you want to say, was 7 songs.
Yep.
And as far as the cohesiveness of the songs, it does have like a very 90s kind of sound to it, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
When you rolled it out, did you have like a big album release party, or how did you kind of debut the album to the public?
Well, it was weird because we had some tampering from a record label that is pretty big time. We had this A&R guy kind of working with us, and it was, I mean, those people are so shady. They'll tell you how much they love you, and then they're like, I like this about the song, but what would you think? Or he's like, well, where's the chorus catchy part to it? Well, it was very like an interfering experience and kind of deflating. So we almost didn't make it through that.
So with the A&R person, that's how the record company got involved with it, or
well, we had started, like when we started recording that, and our good friend's studio at his lake house. We had it for a while. It was just me, and I was just kind of launching the demos of it online, and I got bites through, of all places, was like MySpace, and that's where this company, and like at first I read the message, I'm like, oh dude, this is bullshit. And he's like, I'll be in Chicago this weekend, would you like to meet me for dinner? I'm like, oh, okay.
So did you meet him for dinner?
I met him for dinner. He sweet talked me, and then he's like, yeah, send me some stuff. I like this. He's like, I want more of it. Very, very cliche. It's like, I need more of this. How fast can you do this? It's like, you want this, right? And I'm like a 21-year-old kid at the time. I'm just like, yes, whatever you need me to do, I will do it. But I'm glad it went south. But you always got to wonder if, like, what if I just did whatever this guy told me to? Like, how would things be different? Probably still not in a good way, I wouldn't imagine. Just doing whatever people tell you to do. Nothing's your own at that point.
Well, especially, like, I don't know if, like, what they were offering or what he was suggesting, but, I mean, sometimes things are very, like, backloaded, like, well, sign everything to us, and then if it does this well, you'll get this back, but, you know, you sign away your songs or do whatever.
Right. It didn't even like get that far. It was like he heard the first master of the whole EP, and then he just wrote a bunch of notes, like how it sounded basically like really stupid. It's like, what are we doing here? You know, like.
Well, it's kind of exciting to have that happen on your first release.
For sure, but it really quickly went from, like, you guys are great to absolutely just getting roasted. I'm like, all right.
Well, the album cover, who did the album cover for that?
That's,
you guys are standing in an alley.
Yeah, that's the Pritzloff building in Milwaukee. It's like this big event, and I didn't even know it was like this gorgeous, like, event place. It just looked like good lighting for some shadows and really nothing special. We were just walking the streets one day with a photographer, and she's like, I like this spot. I'm like, all right. But it did fit like the feel of the record when you listen to it through. It's got kind of like that dark, winterish, Milwaukee winterish type vibe to it, and a lot of the music kind of matches with that on that particular record. So it worked out well.
Well, then that kind of seems like got you hungry to get another release out, and a couple years later, you put the self-titled out. Yeah,
that we went kind of berserk for. It was like we had done our first studio process, and we're like, this is fun. Like, how can we do this more on our own terms? So we ended up doing it in our basement with, there's a producer and engineer out of Milwaukee, Chicago area. His name's Nate Gessner, longtime friend of mine. And he came down we worked on it for a month, and it was a record of no overdubs, just all live takes. Like that was we wanted to experience like that aspect of like, and at the time we were a trio, so it's like let's just get like the rawest form of us that we can, and just try to represent where we are accurately at the time. Very, very raw, rough sounding.
Are you happy with how it turned out?
It's weird listening back to songs as you get older. I feel like art is never completed. It's always just kind of temporary. Like you could work on ideas for a million years, and still, like as you get older and as your tastes change, like you go back and like, I wish I would have cut this section out a little more, or made this section a little more interesting. But it's like, I appreciate at the time, but it's better for me to look back at the time and be like, well, this is just where we were. You can't change where you were at the time. So it's very much like a time capsule that I see it as.
Did you prefer the way of doing the self-titled album versus the debut, like recording it in a basement versus
versus more of a studio setup? I mean, we did a little bit of both for our self-titled that we did in 2014-15. Like we did a whole day in a studio in Madison, just doing drums, and the rest of the record was in my basement. It's just finding a good drum space, and but there was aspects of it that I liked both ways. The studio the real studio setup kind of showed me like, here's like all the gear, and at home was more of like, it's in your software, and it's we're going to really focus on just avoiding all of that and just making it sound like it's through the amps, through everything like that. So, I mean, each one has its perks of, what you're able to do. But with that batch of songs that we had, it made sense for the second one versus like, I don't know how those songs would have sounded going into the first place we did.
Going to Madison Media Institute as well. I mean, do you like to have the hands-on approach?
Yes.
Recording?
I'm in ways, but there's ways I need to step away from it. I need somebody else to come in and just like validate like everything that you're doing sounds good. It's always nice to get a second set of ears. Like audio engineer, in my opinion, has always been like basically an extra person in the band, like doing all the fine touch-ups and stuff that you might miss or be a little more biased to because it is your own music, versus if you have somebody else mix it for you, mix and master for you, you're getting somebody else's perspective on what you're doing, which was always important to me, because that way it feels more like even further of a collaboration type of deal.
So who did the cover for that album? Was that a stock photo, or is that one
that would have been my sister-in-law's like high school boyfriend at the time? Was very much into artwork, and incredible artist. Austin Lloyd was his name. Is his name. Always did really cool type of stuff, and I anytime we did art, it was always kind of like, here's the music, like, give us your interpretation. And basically it's like another collaborator coming in, giving your spin, giving like a different perspective of like visual to sound interpretation was always important to all of us. And he great artist.
So he listened to the music and then took the photo based off, or looked through what he had already photographed.
He had drawn that, and it was just the vibe of just like three dudes sitting on a porch, like kind of felt like the kind of record that it was, like a good Sunday drive in the fall type easy listening rock record, very lo-fi.
And you had Jake in the band, like off and on. Like was he ever like a full-time member of the band?
He was full-time. Jake, he was one of the first people that ever came in when I started launching some of the earlier demos. He was one of the first people that were drawn to it. But sometimes we had complications trying to get ideas together, and it's always hard to come in with two different ideas and be like, how can we meet this in the middle? Because everybody's influences are so much different, and we were really young at the time, and there's a great chance that I've already might have had ideas in my head how things should have sounded, and I was kind of working in tune with what the audio engineer also thought, like this will really complement the mix type of thing. So I was always kind of like, he knows what he's talking about. Let's listen to this type of guy, and people, it's a delicate thing bringing ideas forth and all of that. But he just found a new band that had formed in 2020 called Bad Year. He ended up joining them kind of when he was with us, and then he ended up just doing that full time. And he's like, I appreciate the time, and he's like, I had a lot of fun doing this, but it takes a band to learn what it is you want to do.
So you guys played with Bad Year at one point, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, we played a couple of shows with them coming right out of the pandemic. They had released a really solid EP right out of the gate, and I was spinning it right when it came out. I want to say, dude, it had to be right when the pandemic hit, and everybody kind of got stopped with what they're doing. And I just remember, when this comes back, we should play a show with these guys because it's a great energy. And Jake ended up finding them. They needed a guitar player, and I didn't blame him for wanting to join. It was very much in his wheelhouse, and so it to him to go to a band that like we all respected was like awesome to see, actually. So it was like none of those like hard feelings or anything. Like there was tough talks, that you have to have when you're doing this kind of stuff, but no hard feelings. Incredible guitar player. He whiz with all of his effect. You should see his board. It's just wild. It looks like he looks like a DJ on guitar.
I kind of jumped us ahead here in the chronological order, but we got a couple of questions from Jerry.
Shit. What's up, Jerry?
2 questions for Adam. I saw you at Mile of Music, the first show I attended at Mile last year, and then again at Fox River House with the Lately. Did you play many shows previously in the Fox Valley, and what are your thoughts on the experience you had at Mile and Fox River House? You guys are great.
Thank you. Outside of Mile of Music, we never made our way up here, but and it's one of those things where we had planned this summer, we had planned a decent amount up this way, because we had such great experience at Mile of Music. I remember we were the first band at Chadwick's opening night, and like as we're loading in, there's a couple people there, and then by the time I think 5:00 hit, like the place is packed, and I remember people. I'm like, how do people know about this? Well, they do everybody at Mile does a great job promoting everything, and it always helps too that having kind of a music culture built in, where like you and I had talked about earlier. It's not a place where bands just show up and you just kind of hope people drawn in. Like the venue has already created the culture for you to come into, and that was what made it probably the best experience. And people were really showing for the music, and it was one of my favorite all-time experiences, is playing Mile of Music.
We'll talk a little bit more about Mile later. Jerry had a second question as
Sure.
well. Are you going to take a break from music, or are you planning? And Jerry's really hitting in on all the the hard-hitting questions here.
Sure.
Thanks, Jerry. Are you guys going to take a break from music, or are you planning on diving into another project?
I'm personally gonna take a little time off just because it's a little different for somebody like me that really takes a singer-songwriter approach versus our guitar player that came into our band, Wally. He's like, we gonna do anything right off the bat? And I'm like, dude, I kind of need a minute. Like, we were really focused on like heading into the summer here, and now that's all kind of off. I was like, you know what, maybe I'll just take the summer off and just see how things roll. And I told everybody, just you keep yourselves busy. Whatever you got to do, we'll come back in a few months. Let's keep talking. But I feel like I need to just really sit down with a different set of ideas. You got to go into a different mindset if you're starting something totally like scratch, which I haven't done since I was 20 years old. I haven't started from scratch, which I'm at a very different point of my life that like I can't be out there every night seeing shows, talking to people, and trying to get something off the ground. I mean, it is easier having the resume that we have now, I'm sure, but it's like the whole thing of like, you got to like the people that you're playing with. You're starting all these new relationships, and I've got 3 kids at home, so it's I definitely could see myself coming back doing something, but it would be in a much different format, if that makes sense. Because if I don't want to launch the same 2 ideas and just call them 2 different things. So it's really just kind of sitting down and just being like, well, what do I want this to sound like is the biggest thing. So, I mean, I've got plenty of ideas in the back burner of directions that I've thought about going, and but a lot of stuff also kind of depends on like, okay, what do we want to change in your rig that you're playing? Like, do you want to play some more acoustic type stuff? And like the singer-songwriter stuff never was good for me. I always hated the sound of my voice. So I feel like a lot of singers do, and I feel like it shines more when more are around to complement it. So I don't ever see myself just like playing some cafe and just strumming along. So I would always feel like it's got to be somewhat in a band format, but yeah, I mean, it won't be Appalachian stuff. But I'll always be in the rock realm, through and through, no matter what I do. That's all I know is rock music,
Since we're kind of talking a little bit about mild music, but how does like playing with other bands like the Lately, Jerry mentioned the Lately, which is a great rock band from the Appleton area. When you're playing with bands like the Lately, whatever the band, do you normally keep in contact with those bands?
Sure. Yeah. Anytime we talk to somebody, I always save information, and I'm always making notes about, because I mean, after a while, you play with a lot of bands, like when you're doing this, so it's easy to kind of like oh yeah, we played with them this year. So I always actually made myself good about staying organized of like contacts of people that we've played with and that we had good shows with. But playing with the Lately, the fun group of guys, and anytime I always watch other bands play, like it's just like watching their approach and then just kind of like sitting back thinking to myself, like trying to envision like how they might have gone about like coming to these conclusions with their music. And it's always an interesting experience to watch, especially when you make your own music. You're always, versus if you're just only consuming it, you don't think of certain things. Like, I'm always curious to what it sounds like, what people who don't play instruments and they hear my music, like what they think, because I'm I have a bias because I play guitar and like there's certain things I want to hear versus like somebody else hears your music and they don't have like a formality to any type of instruments. I always thought it was interesting to like find those kind of perspectives. Like what do you hear of just like the sound you have no idea about? And like I always take that approach when I'm listening to other bands too, like as a consumer, as like an artist, so that's how I've always just kind of dialed in, checking other bands out and fall in love with them. Some you hit next. I mean, I've probably been one of those bands somebody hits next. Like no hard feelings, you know.
The harsh reality. So after that self-titled album, the band ended up breaking up. Or at least maybe not breaking up, but taking a 5-year hiatus.
Yeah, it was like a hiatus. And at the time, it was like, well, maybe in like 6 months. Or like we just didn't know how long it would be till people had the time to really put the necessary energy back into it, which is the most important thing is, you know, having the drive to do it. Otherwise, if you don't have the drive, you're not going to get the results that you're searching for. So it's like one of those things like you're either all in or you're not.
So when you stepped away for that time, I mean, I'm guessing you felt like there was something missing from your life, or there was like that outlet that wasn't there.
Yeah, and that's already hit me hard too. At this point, it's just like I've spent so many hours like the last 3 years with all these guys, and like I called our drummer Ryan last night because I hadn't talked to him since our last show. I'm like for this whole month I'm like, oh, Ryan's leaving band. I'm like so heartbroken, and then it's like sinking in like, no, he's not leaving the band. He's leaving like the entire state. Like he's moving across the country, and it took me a minute to like process that. It's like, holy cow! Like so much can change in like snap of your finger.
Well, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but what ended up getting the band kind of to get active again, you had kind of a health situation.
Yeah, I spent so 2020 or just December of 2019, I had noticed some pain in my right shoulder. I remember waking up and feeling my arm just numb for like almost like the whole day, like almost like you slept on it and cut off all the circulation. And it just wouldn't go away. And at the time, I thought it was because I was overdoing it at work. At the time, I was running my own tree service. I was always an arborist as my line of work. So I just kind of did the normal guy thing, like give it a couple weeks, you know, see how it feels. And it wasn't getting better. It was getting worse and worse. And winter had to be like early or around Christmas time of 2019. I remember my wife kind of saved my life in a way because we were outside playing with the kids. I packed a huge fat snowball, and I tried to whip it at her, and it just felt like a pitcher like tearing his rotator cuff, and I was like, oh my God, and I couldn't lift anything after that, like for an entire week. So I went in and they checked everything out. They're like, well, let's get an X-ray and see what's going on, and they're like, we don't see anything on the X-ray. Nothing looks broken, but we do see something like she's like, the nurse at the time's like, do you feel this back here? There's something decently protruded. And I kind of did look like a hunchback almost in a way. And she's like, stand against this wall and tell me if you feel how uneven it is. So I'm standing against this wall, and it felt like there was a rock behind my arm, which I had never noticed. And she's like, yeah, something's back there. The best way we can take a look is an MRI. So I did the MRI like a week later, and I'm dry. Just as soon as I got home, I get a call from the doctor, and they're like, hey, we have a meeting, or we have an opening in about 10 minutes to discuss your results if you're able to come in. I'm like, oh, that's sweet. Like, you're able to get me in right away, and went down there. Didn't think anything of that. Like, it's kind of weird when they ask you to come in right?
Yeah, you must have.
Didn't even cross my mind. I figured they just thought I was some really busy guy, and where I was being prioritized nicely or something. But then I walked in. I remember walking into the doctor's office. Somebody from the front desk like took me over. Usually it's like one of the nurses that gets you checked in or whatever. She's like, "Oh, you're here." She's like, "Let me walk you back there." I'm like, "This seems a little VIP for an MRI." And then she knocks on this door, opens the door. There's like a room of like 10 doctors. And I kind of see my doctor in there, and he's like, "Excuse me, everybody, go into his office." It sits down, and he's like, "Obviously, you know, when we call you in here like this, it's not good." I'm like, "What are we dealing with here?" And he's like the radiologist that looked at everything is like 100% certain it's cancer. And I just remember like, it was almost like an out-of-body experience at that point. Like, I just kind of remember just being on top of the room, just kind of looking down, and I could almost like see myself just pacing expletives. That's all that was coming out. And he's just trying to calm me down, and he had to call my wife and explain that to her. That was a super tough conversation to hear. And that all transpired kind of, and then I had to have a surgery, and the kind of cancer it was called a dedifferentiated chondrosarcoma, which is a super rare bone cancer, and it's got a really bad, generally bad outcomes. I think pretty much everybody dies of it within the first 2 years. And like the reoccurrence rate is like in the first 2 years is like a 75%, and it doesn't react to chemo or radiation. So it's like, and then we finally got to the time of the surgery, and they were trying to figure out what exactly it was. They knew it was a big tumor they were working with at the time, and they were trying to draw samples, couldn't find it. They're like, "We're going to do the surgery. We're just going to get clean, wide margins, remove it, and then we'll test it, just so we're not like spreading and doing anything malignant with it." Then they got the test back, and he's like, "Okay, even worse than we thought. Like, I was hoping it would be mostly benign, but he's like, this is mostly grade 3, grade 4 chondrosarcoma." Then he gave me basically all the stats of like, you'll be lucky for another couple type of thing. And then, so I honestly spent like 2 years, or like, yeah, a solid 2 years, just like every time I go back to the doctor, it's going to be find out that like, you're going to start getting the countdown. So that was super tough. And with all of that, as I was recovering and getting better, I took time off of work, spent time, raising my kids, all the things that you might want to do if you're thinking like, I don't have that much longer. So, and then one of the biggest things was like, dude, I gotta call the boys, and like, even if it's just in my basement and like we don't do anything with it, like it would be a perfect way to say goodbye to some of those people. And that was really the mentality at the time was like, I'm doing all these things as like a goodbye. And then, but getting back to the band, I remember it just being a perfect outlet of like, where I can take this super dark energy, doesn't hurt anybody, it's not toxic to your household, it's not affecting relationships, it's all in our artistic form. And I look back, I listen back to some of the stuff, and it's like, super heavy from where I was.
Yeah, that's a very kind of mentally kind of damaging situation.
Every day. And like, as I'm getting better, my kids are kind of freaked out about me, because they were really young at the time. I have 3, and I only had 2 at the time, and the oldest I think was 3, so they had no idea what was going on, but they knew something different was going down with Dad. And I remember just like, I was stuck in this chair, and I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. I was just trying to watch some spring training, and all my days were filled of just like Cocomelon in the background. Just like, this can't be the way I go out. Is, the next year and a half of Cocomelon. Like, I really felt like I needed to get out and do something like meaningful, and a big thing was like, okay, if I gotta leave this world, like, wouldn't it be nice if my kids and everybody else could hear their dad's voice?
Yeah.
That was a big mentality going into it too.
After that traumatic cancer
Mm-hmm.
that you had to go through, which is something that just that word alone is enough to send the shivers down my spine.
Yeah.
Band gets back together, and you released a album of demos and live versions and some unreleased stuff.
Yeah, we did. I was like, instead of going back to this material and try to like make life of it, like, why not just release it as is? Just something to kind of like warm our way back up into restarting, basically, is what it was. And we the idea was like, let's start everything fresh, like not so much of like just pick up where we left off, like just start a fresh era of like just completely new ideas. And that we tell them how I really felt was like 20 songs, and some of the songs like 30 seconds long, and different demos of stuff that we had released of songs were on there. So
29 tracks. That's quite extensive.
Right. And just, I mean, there was probably like closer to like 500, and those are just some of the ones that were like, some of those are recorded on like a cell phone, and it's just like, it has that cool like tape demo feel to them that you used to get out of compilations or demo sets in like the early 90s. So that was kind of like, that's a cool thing. Like, I kind of envisioned it like people passing a tape around, like, check these guys out. Like, that was the whole point of that. And it was super easy to do. It's just like, I already had all this stuff here. Let's just get it out. I mean, that's what it's about. It's releasing yourself, right?
Yeah, and I think when you guys got the band back together, then it was sort of moving on to getting some new stuff recorded. You guys released a really fantastic single called Outside.
Yes.
And then Ritalin was the latest release. You guys did a CD release show for that at Shank Hall a month ago.
Yep.
What were the, like, if the band wasn't kind of dispersing, what was the next step in the game plan?
Well, you would have seen us at this next mile for a couple of days. You would have seen us in Chicago at Summerfest. So there was a lot of
stuff
a lot of emails that I was just like, gotta be the bad guy. But
again,
everybody's understanding. People know how it goes.
I mean, you didn't feel the urge to maybe like just smash something else together and do those commitments?
Yeah, I mean, I could have, but it just kind of feels like, why do I get that spot versus anybody else? Like, it's something like, we are in this together. Like, how no matter what, at the end of the day, like, nobody's last name is on the front of whatever release. It just says the Appalachians. So it's, just kind of leave the spot for the band. And, if I do something next move, be on my own terms, on my own grounds, like kind of the way in the Appalachians is, but in a different format, and, on my own credibility, not living off of, I mean, you'll always have that. People might know you something from something else, and so that can make it tricky. Like, you look at somebody like people who have tried to start other projects. Billy Corgan always comes to my mind. He really wanted to get out of like the Pumpkins vibe for a while, but I mean, Billy Corgan sounds like Billy Corgan. Like, it's always, even if he's Billy Corgan, it just sounds like Pumpkin stuff. So,
well, is there anything else in the tank that the Appalachians had that you might be able to release, or is it?
We do have a couple of songs that we were planning to release that I think we'll release at some point. I don't know when. rainy day type of stuff, band camp, maybe some weird anniversary type deal. Like, I mean, we already hit a 10-year with one of our albums, and another one's coming up soon, so maybe we'll do something like that and throw in a couple new tracks. But I mean, there's not a ton left in the gas tank, if that's what you're asking.
Any chance that the band might do a one-off or one of those, a show 3 years down the road, or
I'll never say it's not possible. I would probably just say it's unlikely just because of logistics, having our drummer that's moving to Texas, like, okay, to prepare for a show, like we usually if we ever do a standalone, we usually spend like a solid month and a half just practicing, getting a live set. Like, somebody's coming from Texas for a show that's only going to pay you X amount of dollars, probably not cover your flight or anything like that, and like how much good preparation are you going to have for it. And it's one of those things, like the recipe just has to kind of line itself up in the right way, if that makes sense. Like, things have to just kind of come together perfectly almost for it to happen. But I mean, because it is a lot of energy and a lot of time just for, to do a one-off, and that's something we always took seriously as we started getting older, like making really good decisions. Like, is this worth it? Is this worth it? Is this worth, like, is always our question for anything we do. Like, what's the purpose? I mean, maybe we'll be like, dude, it's been 4 years since the four of us have been in a room together. Like, that on its own is worth it to us. Like, that could totally be the case. So I won't sit here and say like it'll never happen, but I don't know when. It could be 10 years from now when I have no hair.
So the Appalachians were around for over a decade. Is there anybody that you want to thank in the closing of the show, or anybody that you want to give a shout out to?
Lots of people. Everybody at Code Zero, you guys have been super supportive to us over the last couple, especially since we came back, because you guys are fairly new, right? 5, 6 years?
6, 7.
6, 7? Okay, so you've been fired up while we were kind of out of commission. But yeah, every time we've been in Appleton, somebody from your guys' station has been at our show, so we really appreciate the support. David Silbaugh, who does booking for Summerfest, that was always a really big propeller for us. Pete Levy of the Journal Sentinel, everybody that ever booked us, from the Motel 6 that we played in West Bend to Chadwick's to Columbus, Ohio. There's 10 years is a lot. You see a lot of faces, and some really cool experiences. Nate Gessner, Aaron Fontaine, Ben Wachal, who was just had a little bit of a hospital scare with his brain. One of our original bass players, Jake Moore, Max Galici. These are all past members. Greg Calhoun. There's been a lot of people that stepped into this at some point. That's kind of like became its own fraternity in a way, Well,
I want to thank you for doing this show today.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we'll have you back again in the next project.
When there is a next project, this will be one of my first stops, I promise.